Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the audio version of my newsletter. Today's episode is called 10,000 Hours. A friend recently reminded me of the 10,000 hours concept. The idea is that to become expert in any subject, you need to actively do it for at least 10,000 hours. In other words, it takes a long time to be really good at something. That is why we can't be experts at everything. Our lives are simply too short to hit that threshold repeatedly. We need to specialise. Now, big caveat, not everyone agrees with the 10,000 hours thing. I take it as more of an indicator, a fun kind of guide rather than a scientific assessment. The BBC has a nice article comparing viewpoints, which I'll stick down in the show notes. And there are obvious holes in it as a blanket statement. Some kids are expert at things long before they're able to have completed 10,000 hours. There are subjects and activities which I will never be expert in, even if I stopped everything else and dedicated my entire life to them. There are limits, and everyone has their own particular talents. It doesn't matter how much effort I put in, I'm never going to be any good at composing classical music, or playing American football, or spelunking. Anyway, let's set all of that sensible debate aside because it's boring. Today, we are fully embracing the 10,000 hour idea. We're going all in. In fact, we're going so deep that I've made a spreadsheet that you can download. I'll get to that a bit later on. The reason I was intrigued at being reminded of the concept is that I've done a lot of writing over the last decade. Since 2014, I've written and published fiction every single week. Since 2021, I've added a weekly non-fiction newsletter to that mix. That has to add up to a big number of hours dedicated to this thing that I love, right? Okay, number crunching time. Let's take this newsletter first. My fiction chapters tend to come in around 1,500 words. It takes me perhaps 2 hours of solid writing to create a chapter, but we all know that writing isn't just about putting the words on the page. The planning, the ruminating, the rewriting, the quiet moments in between other things, those are all part of the practice. So let's say I spend 4 hours per week on my fiction. Sometimes it'll be more, rarely it'll be less, but you get the idea. I also do the non-fiction newsletter, like the one you're listening to at the moment, which can vary wildly in length and creation time, so let's just take a very rough average of 3 hours per week. I've been writing the newsletter for 2.5 years, so let's say 130 weeks total. These are not precise numbers, but I don't care. Just embrace the fuzziness. So we're talking 910 hours of writing time. I've actually been serialising fiction since 2014, so let's add that in as well. I'm going to take it as 7 years up to when I shifted to the newsletter. 364 weeks then, and at 4 hours per week. On that fiction, we're talking 1,456. Together, that's 2,366 hours since I started taking my writing seriously and formed a regular habit. It's felt like an awful lot of writing, so I'm slightly disappointed that I'm so far off that 10k. However, it's not like I didn't do any writing prior to embracing serial fiction. I've been writing on and off for most of my life. And there's all the fiction and learning of English and writing that I did at school. How to work that out? I was very sporadic with my writing prior to leaning into serials. I'm going to go on the low end here and say half an hour per week for most of my life. There were intensive periods where all I did was write, and there were lengthy fallow times where no words came out. If I start from when I was 6 years old up until I was 34, which is when I started serial writing, that's 28 years, so 1,456 weeks at half an hour per week, that's 728 hours. And okay, that puts it into perspective, doesn't it? For the first 28 years of being able to write, I clocked up about 728 hours of intensive work, while in the last decade alone, 2014 to 2024, I've done 2,366 hours. Needless to say, it shows the power of nurturing a reliable writing habit. Okay, so overall I'm now up to 3,094 hours. Not bad, not bad. So let's figure out all the education. This gets even fuzzier as I can't remember how much time was spent studying writing at different schooling levels. This will also vary massively per person, depending on how long someone stays in school, their chosen subjects, as well as the curriculum in your particular country. Some vague Googling suggests that primary schools average out at 5 hours per week of English. though I'll only count it from year 3 onwards, because otherwise it gets a bit silly. For secondary, let's say 4 hours per week. For sixth form/college, I'll assume 5 hours. When I was at university in the early 2000s, arts degrees were notoriously slack, so let's say 3 hours per week. And I was studying a combined English and film degree, so, did even less. A complicating factor here is that we're not talking all year round, as schooling doesn't continue for 52 weeks straight, thankfully. It's more like 39 weeks for schools and about 30 weeks for universities. So, once we add all of that up, that's 2,220 hours accumulated over my formal education, and that brings me up to a total of 5,314 hours. Yeah, I'm getting there. So what about work, the day jobs? Now, not all will be relevant, but as a copywriter, tutor and marketer, I've worked on a lot of story-based campaigns over the years, which have definitely informed my fiction writing. It's almost impossible to put a specific time on this, though, as it's over a very long period of time and is not a regular, repeating schedule. My employment over the years has involved all sorts of non-writing duties as well. I think going on the low end with a single hour per week during my working life probably makes sense. I've been working full-time for 22 years, so that ends up being 1,144 hours. This is evidently the loosest of these made-up, finger-in-the-air numbers. The grand total, then, 6,458 hours. Another 4 years of writing this newsletter at this pace, and I'll hit the magic 10k. And then I can get my certificate and be officially clever. Another 4 years. Wow, that feels like a long time to have to wait before I'm an expert. Of course, this is all nonsense. It doesn't matter how many hours you've spent writing or doing anything else that you're passionate about. The main thing is that you're doing it at all. That's what this newsletter is all about, after all. Some people are incredible straight out of the gate. They write a book when they're 19, and it's a stunning achievement, and the rest of us get slightly annoyed. Others spend decades improving their craft, building up those skills over time, and it's entirely possible to come to writing later in life and dive straight in. It's also completely fine to be okay at something. We don't have to be experts or the leading voices in our fields. We want to be improving, sure, but it's healthiest and most useful to compare ourselves to our previous selves, not to other people. There will always be better writers than me. There will always be worse writers than me. That has and always will be the case, and I think it's a good thing. One other thing. We're not on our own, and we're not figuring all this out by ourselves. People have told stories for thousands of years. Writers were publishing serial fiction over a century ago. Books have been written in various forms for millennia. We're all part of a long history of human storytellers, which means we're not operating solely based on our own directly experienced hours. Those 6,458 hours I somewhat spuriously conjured up, how about adding the hours contributed from all the authors I've ever read? And then the people who they read, the countless humans who helped invent the written word, all of the oral storytellers who spun tales long before they could be recorded anywhere other than to memory. All of us are building on the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of cumulative hours of creativity generated by human history. And we're each making our own contribution to what comes next. Thanks for listening. You can leave comments, tell me if my maths is completely shot, and go grab that spreadsheet so you can work out how many hours you've got left until you're an official expert. Over on the newsletter version, you can find that at simonkjones.substack.com, and you can also, if you want, choose to be a paid subscriber, which is absolutely lovely but entirely optional. Okay, have a great day, and thanks for listening.